Thought, you know, what was going on in the lives of these women while they were making these quilts, because they were just all so distinctive. When I started writing this play, I think one of the sort of intimidating things was to write something that was based on real people, which is something I hadn't done before, and I felt like I had a huge responsibility to make the story authentic and to make it real and to get it right. Mary Lee Bendolph, who is one of the quilters that I interviewed, said to me, just tell it honest, and I think that was probably the thing that drove me throughout the entire process, was that desire to try and write it honest. I made my first trip to Gee's Bend on December 26, 2004, and we had our first rehearsal for the world premiere on December 26, 2006. So it was really 2 full years, and I spent about a year doing research before I ever actually wrote anything. So,
what inspired you guys to go out to Gee's Bend to do the story? How did
you know, I took my grandmother to see the quilts when they were on exhibit at the Mobile Museum of Art. While I was in college, in grad school, they were on display at the Whitney in New York. And the New York Times had written this big article about it called The Greatest Collection of American Folk Art and History. But because I was in college, in grad school, and because I was ass broke, I couldn't go to the Whitney to see them. Yeah. Right. So then when they were at the Mobile Museum of Art, and every Thursday it's free, I took my grandmother. So when the Alabama Shakespeare Festival reached out to me, which was at least a year later, and they said, you know, we'd love for you to come in and pitch a couple of ideas. This was really the only idea I had, and I knew it was a good fit for that theater, obviously. I knew we had something special. I just didn't know if it was going to work or not. And the show came down, and that audience leapt to their feet. And this was the first time Mary Lee had ever been inside a theater, ever.
Oh, wow!
And there were a couple of other quilters there too. But the way the theater is that where they did the reading was, you know, if you're in the front row, you're on the stage, and Miss Mary Lee leapt to that stage going, wonderful, wonderful, and then hugged all the actors on the stage, and then took a bow. And that became Mary Lee's thing, because after we ran it at Alabama Shakes, we got a big grant to take it on tour around the state, which was really amazing, because we were able to take it to communities where people wouldn't normally go to the theater. Right. And the other amazing thing was we actually were able to do Gee's Bend in Gee's Bend.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we literally set up a tent in the site that had been the old co-op, and where the old co-op had been, and we did this play, and it was just wonderful. But everyone, and Miss Mary Lee became a groupie, and she had her grandson drive her to as many of those shows as she possibly could, and the cast knew that if Mary Lee was in the audience, Mary Lee was going to take a bow. And of course everyone just welcomed her on the stage, but it was pretty great. But it was really interesting when we did the first reading, because her grandson, who was living with her, had driven her down, and he was gonna go get something to eat, and he ended up staying and sitting in the back, and at the end of the play he was just crying. And she said to him, you know, why are you crying? And he said, and he was probably 17, 18, he said, Grandmama, I had no idea y'all went through all this.
Wow.
So it was interesting to see how that portion of the history of this community had gotten lost over the years. And I asked Mary Lee about it, and she said, it was so bad, we went through it once, why would we want to talk about it again? And it was real interesting, because there were so many, you know, young people in the community who knew nothing about 1932 when Miss Rents took all their stuff. You know, they didn't know about that's where all the houses came from, the Roosevelt houses. You know, they didn't know about the Civil Rights Movement. Most of them never knew that Martin Luther King had been in Gee's Bend. Wow. And one reason why Gee's Bend became this sort of hub of the Civil Rights Movement, or not really hub, but it became a place where the community could come together, was because it was really the only African American community in the state of Alabama, and one of the few in the South, where you had Black people who own their own land. So no one could say, if you do this, I'm going to burn you off your land, or I'm going to kick you off your land, because they weren't sharecroppers. They owned their land, and that gave them power. And so a lot of the civil rights leaders would come to Gee's Bend. It was also so remote that they could then sort of figure out or plan what the next move was going to be.
Thank you. Lost 30 seconds.
oh,